Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for this initiative. Uh, I'll come straight to the point. Uh, when you talk of people-to-people relations, there are two basic challenges now, I think, in relations between India and Nepal. On the Indian side, there is this concern, which is almost an obsession, that security concerns of India, legitimate security concerns of India, are not receiving the kind of sensitive attention in Nepal that a true friendly neighbor should be giving. It is almost an obsession, and this aspect about the growing uh, tendency on the part of Nepal to cozy up to China is irrespective of India's sensitivities. That is adding to this sense of Indian concern. And on the Nepalese side, on the one hand, there is a tendency towards kind of ultra-nationalism, self-destructive ultra-nationalism, which is neither good for Nepal nor good for India-Nepal relations. And there is also this perception about India, which General Mehta has referred to, others have referred to. India has its own agenda, India is trying to interfere, etc., etc. So partly it's a question of perception, of style, perhaps. Sometimes it's a question of policies or how they are implemented. But there's this combination. It's a very dangerous and explosive combination. The only way to tackle this combination of challenges that India and Nepal face, security, China on one side, ultra-nationalism, perceptions about India, growing anti-Indianism on the Nepalese side, the only way to tackle this is to recognize the importance of the people-to-people relationship. And if we don't recognize it, if we don't utilize it, if we don't nurture it with a certain sense of urgency, then I'm afraid even the people-to-people relationship is going to be overwhelmed by these other concerns that I'm talking about on one side or the other. And I had personal experience of this during my 5.5 years in Nepal as to how people-to-people relations could be useful and how they could be affected by the inability to proactively manage India-Nepal relations at other levels. General Mehta had referred to the Madhuri Dixit episode. Incidentally, it happened in the 90s when we were there. I was ambassador there, not in the 70s. She had come there for the launch of a certain film, and talking to people, she innocently said that after all, Nepal was at one time part of India. I was told by many people, just ignore it because nothing's going to happen. They love Madhuri Dixit too much. Madhuri Dixit reached Mumbai and saw my fax message to her, asking her to retract this immediately and saying that she did not mean this, she did not mean to injure the sentiments of Nepalese. People in my own embassy said, don't worry, you're taking it too seriously. But sure enough, by 6 o'clock next morning, people had started lining up outside her hotel to protest and so on and so forth. So it's a question of understanding sensitivities and taking steps in time. I think the real downturn in people-to-people relations began when the IC aircraft 814 was hijacked. Again, unfortunately, I happened to be in Nepal at that time. That was one incident which really wrecked the image of Nepal as a country in India. Nepal was a favorite place for parents to send their children for their honeymoon and so on. But I myself know of many, many people who cancelled. They said, we don't want to send anyone to Nepal because Nepal, has, in a sense, wrongly they said, because of the way the media projected Nepal. I think the media Indian media gave disproportionate blame to Nepal on this. But they thought that Nepal has done this to us. And when the IC Indian Airlines flights, the then Indian Airlines flights were resumed, the negotiations were very long and very tortuous. You must have noticed that when you take a flight from Kathmandu to Delhi, Kathmandu must be the only airport in the world where a passenger is not allowed to be frisked on the tarmac before boarding the aircraft. Because when we were negotiating with the Nepalese, they said we will not allow Indian security people, even airline security people, to frisk passengers on Nepalese soil. So you have this peculiar modification where you have to climb up a few steps and then the frisking takes place actually just before you enter the aircraft. So there is this kind of sensitivity, and from the Indian perception, it is an inability on the Nepalese side to understand genuine security concerns. Now, again, you know, when the Mahakali Treaty was being about to be ratified, I remember a leader of the Nepalese opposition calling on me and saying, look, this treaty is in Nepal's interest. We will definitely ratify it, but you know the government is going to change. Every 3 months or 6 months, the government used to change when I was there. And he said, you just wait for a few months. When we come to power, we will ratify it. So don't be in a hurry to ratify. I said, I'm not going to interfere in your domestic politics. Let the Nepalese parliament do whatever they like. Sher Bahadurji was the prime minister, and the thing came up for ratification. It was ratified. But the opposition leaders were so upset with me because I had not followed their advice that they started a lot of agitation against India at the people-to-people level. There was, for example, a chain of human hands which was organized to protest against either Kala Pani or something that was supposed to have happened in Mechi, etc., etc. What I thought at that time was the only way to tackle this people-to-people challenge was to exactly use the people-to-people mechanism instead of just using the government mechanism. And I remember there was a team from the National School of Drama in Kathmandu at that time, training Nepalese artists to perform a play in Nepali. And we decided to have it at that time when the human chain was being formed in Kathmandu, and it was evoking a fantastic response among people in Nepal and threatening to spoil the atmosphere of India-Nepal relations. Believe me, when this play in Nepali was staged in the National School of Drama, the human chain just broke up. People refused to join the human chain. They came rushing to the auditorium. They stood, they sat on the floor. The point is, this is the powerful tool that both countries have. You should not underestimate the power of people-to-people relations in overriding the vested interests of some people who might want to threaten the relationship and even undermine the people-to-people relationship. Nepal has two assets, hydropower, tourism. If they are tackled, Nepal will be the richest country in South Asia. Nepal is not able to tackle these two because we are leaving everything to the governments. And so the Pancheshwar Treaty, which was signed during my time, is still being talked about. Sher Bahadurji is again going to talk about 20 years after the event. Why? Because we have not exploited the people-to-people angle. If people on both sides of the Mahakali, which is a border river, upstream, could be educated on the benefits to them of the Mahakali Treaty, they would have forced the politicians to expedite the implementation of the treaty. That didn't happen. So you're dealing in a compartmentalized way, as if everything is done in a vacuum between the two governments. That is terribly wrong. And now Nepal is going to be a federal country. India is already a federal nation. Why on earth do we always talk about Delhi, Kathmandu? This roti beti thing is excellent, but you know, you're only talking about the Hindi-speaking belt and the Madheshi people. Why aren't more people in Nepal going to Chennai, to Bangalore, to Bihar, for other purpose, for other reasons, not just for this? So let us now deal with the relationship at the level where it will increasingly count. Sister city relationships, local government, the state governments, etc., etc. Let us multiply those, and development and not security should now be in the front seat, in the driver's seat of the relationship. A reference was made to the perception that India micromanages relations in Nepal. To some extent, it is true. But the reason is, in fact, it was Hrishikesh Shah, I think, who said once, he wrote a letter to Pandit Nehru asking for advice, and Nehru said, yes, I'll give you advice. The problem is when you ask for advice and I give advice, you call it interference. So that has also been happening. There's just too much of an inclination on the part of all Nepalese political leaders to take India's advice as though it really matters. Actually, it is overstated. India's advice doesn't matter all that much, as we have seen, even recently. So it's partly mismanagement of relations at the government level, partly policies which need to be changed, partly perceptions, the style, and of course vested interests exploiting this. Now, on the 1950 treaty, my suggestion for a long time has been that it is not at all beyond the ingenuity of diplomats on both sides to modify the treaty so that it doesn't become an irritant in the relationship. And India, as a larger country, should probably take the initiative, because what Nepal wants is some of the benefits that it gets in India. It doesn't want to lose those benefits. At the same time, it wants to be treated with respect as a sovereign, independent country. Today, surely, in 2017, India can, be big-hearted enough to accept that Nepal is a sovereign, independent country. What is wrong with that? And we can give concessions to Nepal as a smaller, vulnerable country, but India should take the initiative instead of taking the usual easy option, which is to say, all right, you tell us, what do you want? And the moment the poor Nepalese say, look, can we make a few changes in one or two articles, India's, opens up the possibility of withdrawing concessions which are offered to Nepalese in India, in trade, in residency, etc. So that is not the way. Two countries which are genuine friends, if we talk of a special relationship, that should go beyond the 1950 treaty, and it should extend to modifying the 1950 treaty. I think the important thing is that India's legitimate security concerns have to be accepted, and Nepal has to now honestly accept the fact that there's no question of comparing India and China. China will never be the kind of sincere friend of India, Nepal, which India is. And the sooner Nepal accepts that, the better it will be for the bilateral relationship. Instead of pretending that, there is a China card that can be played, India can be blackmailed into giving more concessions. Now, I think Nepal is playing with fire. I'm saying this as a friend of Nepal. If Nepal thinks that it can go into these initiatives with China in the hope of improving its bargaining position with India, I'm afraid it is going to, as I said, overwhelm the people-to-people relationship about which we are talking, and ultimately, it might pull the rug from beneath the relationship itself. So I would like to stop here, and maybe when we have a discussion, we can discuss some of these points a little more in detail. Thank you.